Is on now.
Okay, thank you. We'll just wait a few minutes for everybody to join. Good afternoon, Robert. Everyone. Hi, Brett. How you doing?
I'm good.
So we're slowly starting to fill the room, but I think it's almost time to start. We have a limited time available on the session, so I want to welcome everyone here at the webinar organized by QM and EOS on ERD. Brett Elkins of EOS Remediation will take over now, and he will do his presentation. So I hope you enjoy. If you have any questions, put them in the chat, and at the end of the session, we will summarize the questions and take it from there. Brett, over to you.
All right, thank you so much. It is telling me that the host has disabled the participant screen sharing. So I'm not sure if I've entered the wrong link or if there's some way you could enable it so I could share my screen so I could bring up my presentation. Robert, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. I just made it possible for you to do it. Is it? Does it work
Yep.
now?
Yes. Okay. Can you see my screen now?
I can see your screen, yes.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay. Well, thank you everyone for joining me today for this presentation. As Robert mentioned, my name is Brad Elkins. I'm the Director of Technical Sales with EOS Remediation. And today I want to just speak with you a little bit about when you might use a biotic pathway, an abiotic pathway, or perhaps both when you're treating chlorinated solvents through enhanced reductive dechlorination. So for those of you in the audience who aren't familiar with who EOS Remediation is, we are a remediation products vendor. We are the developer and formulator of several in-situ remediation technologies, most notably emulsified vegetable oil, or EVO for short. And that's used for treating chlorinated solvents, nitrates, perchlorate, hexavalent chromium, several other recalcitrant compounds. We also have electron acceptors. That's our EAS and EOX product. That's for treating petroleum hydrocarbons. We have zero valent iron, which we're going to talk about a little bit today, and that's for your abiotic degradation pathways. We have some proprietary pH buffers for aquifer pH adjustment and metals immobilization. We supply bioaugmentation cultures, that's the bacterial cultures. We have those for chlorinated solvents, chloroform, 1,4-dioxane, and petroleum. We are leading the industry always in research and development, especially on emerging contaminants. And we're also looking at how we can constantly improve upon our existing technologies. We've been around since 2002. We're headquartered in the Research Triangle Park of North Carolina in the United States, and that's where I'm broadcasting from today. We're represented in Europe by QM Environmental. It was Robert who introduced me. He's the managing director over there and would be your point of contact for EOS and our products inside of Europe. So you'd reach out to him directly and he could help you out. We have 6 distribution points strategically located around the world, including in the Netherlands. So we can serve the EU community right there very locally. Our leadership is our president, Ann Borden, and her husband, principal engineer, Dr. Robert Borden. And Dr. Borden is also professor emeritus at North Carolina State University. And hopefully some of you had a chance to catch his talk yesterday on cis-DCE stalls and cures. If you didn't, after this presentation, go check that out. It should be recorded on the conference page. And also on Friday, I want to mention that Dr. Borden will be giving a in-depth short course on how to improve your bioremediation performance. That's this Friday at 5 p.m. Central European time. So mark that down on your calendar. Go check that out on Friday. So now I'm going to just dive right into the presentation. So I want to do a little introduction on enhanced reductive dechlorination for those of you who might need a little review, not trying to insult anyone's intelligence here. So for ERD, you need an electron donor and you need an electron acceptor. And in the case of our products, that electron donor would be EOS. It would be the emulsified oil substrate, or EOS for short. And we have a couple of varieties of EVO that you can use, but those would be the electron donor. And then the electron acceptor would be the contaminant. So that would be our chlorinated solvent of concern, PCE, TCE, and its daughter products. So what happens in the subsurface is we inject the EOS into the aquifer and it goes through fermentation, and that fermentation releases hydrogen, okay? And then a group of dechlorinating bacteria can utilize that hydrogen and through microbial respiration, exchange a chlorine with a hydrogen. I think we all know this, but again, it's review, and that degrades the contaminant. And then this would continue in a sequential manner where you have complete ERD, you would be left with ethene, which is a non-toxic end product at the very end of this process. So we have the electron donor, that's our EOS formulations that you can use. We can supply the BAC9, that's the bacteria, that's the dechlorinators. And then that last step, that complete ERD step, is very pH sensitive. And so it's critical that you maintain a neutral pH during that process. And if you don't or have prevailing acidic conditions, you need to adjust that. And we have a proprietary buffer, that's our CoBuff MG product. And so we can make this entire reaction happen efficiently at your site. So let's talk a little bit about the microbiology, because I mean, that is, from an EOS standpoint, that is what we're utilizing really as the main really cleanup tool. Is the EVO fuels the process, but we're relying on the bacteria to actually break down the contaminant. And so just some fun facts. There are more microbes in a teaspoon of healthy soil than there are humans on Earth. And as of 2018, it's estimated that there are 1 billion different species of bacteria. Now, we're interested in only one group of bacteria, and that's that D-halorespiring bacteria. And specifically, we're looking for D-halococoides. That's that organism that's responsible for that last critical conversion of vinyl chloride over to ethene. But D-halococoides needs hydrogen in order to do its processes, in order to grow and thrive. So how do we bring in that hydrogen? And that's where the oil comes in. I mentioned this in the first slide, but I want to dive down a little bit more into it, get a little more technical. So soybean oil is a triglyceride. It's got a glycerol molecule. Those 3 long chain fatty acids are cleaved off of that glycerol. So that way your TOC will initially go up because you're releasing that soluble glycerol product. And so you can see on the right-hand side, this graph with TOC, that's total organic carbon. That big spike is that glycerol coming off, and then that's rapidly consumed, and so TOC drops off. And then the little bit of TOC that you're actually able to measure post-injection is really the volatile fatty acids that are also generated from fermentation. Those are somewhat soluble. The oil is insoluble, so you are not able to detect oil through a traditional groundwater TOC analysis. So just be careful if you're using EVO, if you've ever used EVO before, that analyzing TOC can be a little misleading if you don't really understand what the characteristics of the substrate are. Now, why I mention all this is that for PCE to DCE, there's a group of microorganisms, not just D-halococoides, there's a big group of organisms that can utilize hydrogen and acetate, which acetates from that fermentation step, and they can dechlorinate PC and TCE to DCE. However, to go from vinyl chloride to ethene, that's where D-halococoides comes in, and he needs hydrogen. And hydrogen is rapidly consumed in the aquifer, not just by dechlorination, but by other processes as well. So where do we get this hydrogen? Well, we get it from the soybean oil itself. And then you can also get hydrogen from various shorter chain fatty acids that are broken off, but not from the acetate. Once the oil ferments into acetate, that acetate can no longer be further broken down into hydrogen. And that's important for good treatment. You have to bring the oil into contact with where you want treatment. And so we can see this in this data set. So the graph at the top shaded in green, they had really good degradation here. Now, it is the injection well, so you would expect good degradation. But the point here I'm trying to make is that you can see that the breakdown products from the oil, you get not only acetic acid or acetate, but you're getting a variety of other volatile fatty acids. And those are able to produce hydrogen. And therefore, in this well, you're seeing complete reductive dechlorination occur. They're seeing ethene. Now, when we talk about EVO transport, we would want the oil to easily pass through the pore space of the aquifer. And so the oil kind of mimics a little bit the same way that the bacteria transport. You know, they're little insoluble particles, and so is that oil. The emulsion that we create in, like, say, our EOS Pro product, that oil droplet diameter is about 1 micron in diameter. So it can easily pass through the pore space of most aquifers. And you can see that illustrated here in that microscope slide at the top right-hand side. We've got that a little emulsion cluster of oil droplets easily passing through the pore space. And so if we had that, and we had a good emulsion that was appropriately matched to the aquifer, we would see good transport, and you would see a nice distribution of fatty acids and hydrogen being produced. Now the graph at the bottom outlined in red, that's 10 feet down gradient of that injection well that we were just talking about. And you can see that they did not get oil distributed that far down gradient. They are detecting mostly acetic acid, and acetic acid is somewhat mobile. It is soluble in the water. So it was able to be detected 10 feet down gradient. They did get degradation of TCE, but they did not form any ethene. So they were not getting complete reductive dechlorination. And so there's a few explanations for that. Just to keep it simple, because we're talking about the characteristics of the EVO, this might be an example of where you have too large droplets. They will flocculate and then get hung up in the pore space of the aquifer. So you can see that down here on the right-hand side, you have this stuck emulsion there that I've kind of highlighted in yellow. That's where you had EVO that kind of flocculated, fell apart, and got trapped, and is no longer able to further transport where it needs to go. So beyond oil droplets and emulsion characteristics, something else that you can do to enhance your degradation is to make sure that you're injecting enough water with your emulsion. So we would recommend injecting at least 50% of your pore volume as your total injection volume for a remediation site where you're using EOS. So you can see here on the graph, we've got pore volumes injected versus contact efficiency. And you can see if you get about 50% of the pore volume there, you're easily able to achieve about 70 to 80%. Now, further to that, not only the amount of water is important, but the sequence in which you inject your wells is important too. So what we're showing here on this graph is not only pore volumes, but also simultaneous injection versus alternating injection. And what I mean by that is simultaneous would be you're injecting each well right next to each other, all at the same time. And that can create stagnation zones between the wells. It kind of, the flow seems to sort of repel itself. And so you end up with these sort of dead zones when you do simultaneous injections. So your contact efficiency suffers, and that's that blue line on the graph, that simultaneous injection. Now, if we alternate our injection, we inject every other well, we put a space in between our injection wells, you can see that we basically get about a 10% increase in contact efficiency. So not only is the water important, but also how you sequence your injections, how close in proximity you're putting your injection wells, and when you inject those injection wells at the same time. So we know if we follow all of this, if we have a good emulsion with the right droplet size, we inject enough water, we sequence our injection appropriately, the technology is going to work. And here what I'm showing is chemical oxidation. Each one of these lines on both of these graphs is an individual site. And basically what you're looking at is basically how it responded, how much of the parent compound was degraded with time. And you can see that ISCO had very dramatic decreases initially, but a lot of those sites ended up rebounding. And that's kind of a fatal flaw in chemical oxidation. It does work great, it's a good technology, but it has its flaws in that you get rebound. Enhanced bio, you can see that basically every one of these sites had a decreasing trend to it. It wasn't a dramatic decrease, but every single site ultimately had good degradation within the time period of the cleanup. But there are limitations to in-situ bio, and I want to cover that a little bit. So your site conditions matter a lot, and not only your prevailing geochemistry, but also how much contamination you have there. So what I'm showing here is both TCE and TCA, so both your ethines and your ethanes, and degradation rates as a function of concentration. So when you get TCE, say above 5 or 6 milligrams per liter, your efficiencies start to drop off. You are still degrading TCE, just not as efficiently as you would have had the concentration been lower. And the same thing is true for TCA. You get up to about 15 to 20 milligrams per liter, and again, you start losing degradation efficiency. The process is occurring, but it's just not occurring as well as it would have had the concentration been lower, okay? Also, if these plumes are mixed, so if you have both TCE and TCA, they kind of inhibit each other. So the microorganisms for degrading TCE are inhibited by the TCA and vice versa. So commingled plumes of ethenes and ethanes, you either need to apply a strategy for addressing one and then the other, or maybe that's when you start looking at perhaps another technology, like maybe ZVI. And you can see where I'm going with this. Additionally, as I mentioned at the very beginning, in-situ bioremediation is a pH-sensitive technology. To go from PCE to cis-DCE, you got a little bit more of a range there. Basically, between about 5.5 would kind of be the real limit there. That's where your degradation rates, you can see in that graph at the top, are really starting to drop off as you get towards 5.5. 6.5, you're good. But you can see vinyl chloride to ethene, that last critical step to get complete reductive dechlorination, that is incredibly pH sensitive. And the graph, the slope there really drops off steep after, once you get below a pH of 6. So maintaining a neutral pH during this process is critical to get enhanced reductive dechlorination to go all the way to ethene. So why might pH be a problem at the site? Well, one quick answer is you could just have prevailing acidic conditions in the aquifer naturally. I know here in the southeast of the United States, we have a variety of soils that lend themselves to create acidic conditions in the aquifer. I imagine there are places in Europe that are exactly the same. So it may just be that your prevailing conditions are acidic. But something else to keep in mind is that the substrate that you're utilizing. So here I'm showing how much hydrogen is released for each of these given carbon substrates, ZVI not being a carbon substrate, but still releasing hydrogen. And I'll get into that in the next slide. But you can see soybean oil produces the most hydrogen per kilogram. Conversely, it produces some acidity. You know, there are fermentable acids that come off of the production of that hydrogen from fermentation. And there is some acidity that's produced, not as much as some of the other substrates that are out there, but you can change the aquifer pH simply by the substrate that you inject. Now, ZVI actually consumes acidity, and so it's not as reliant on the pH of the system in order for that technology to work. And something else to consider is that not only are you producing acidity from the substrates themselves, but as you're dechlorinating, you're cleaving off a chlorine and you're producing hydrogen. So every mole of PCE that you're degrading, you theoretically can form about 4 moles of hydrochloric acid. So you're producing acidity from both the degradation of the contaminant and the actual process of generating the hydrogen that you need to fuel the process, okay? So let's talk a little bit now about ZVI, because, well, this might be a situation, say you have a real low pH site, you have high or commingled plume, maybe you might want to think about using ZVI. So how does this work? So for ZVI to work, the ZVI and the PCE in this case must actually come into direct contact with each other. They must physically touch each other and actually sorb, okay? And when that happens, that's called reductive elimination, and you get 2 chlorines stripped off. So you would convert PCE to dichloroacetylene and you would oxidize the iron. Now, at the same time this is going on, because you've injected ZVI into a saturated environment, there is water down there. It is also coming into contact with water. At the same time reductive elimination is going on, the ZVI, some of the ZVI is coming into contact with just water. And there's a reaction with that. And you oxidize the iron, you actually produce some hydrogen. That's where that little bit of hydrogen in the graph in the previous slide came from. And then you're producing that little bit of alkalinity. Now that hydrogen that's produced can be used by microorganisms through normal biological reductive dechlorination, or you can sequentially cleave off chlorine with ZVI, and that process is known as hydrogenolysis or hydrogenolysis, however you want to pronounce it. But it's 1 chlorine at a time. Either way, both of these processes will ultimately get you to ethene. And so here's the full breakdown pathway. So you can see we have reductive elimination, that is on the left-hand side, and we have hydrogenolysis on the right-hand side, or just regular biological degradation. And again, this is a surface-mediated process. For reductive elimination to occur, that the iron particle and the solvent must come into direct contact. So that's where the characteristics of zero valent iron start changing the pressure size, the amount of contamination, particle diameter as a function of microns, and reactivity. Okay, and you can see that when you hit tiny particles, nanoscales, you get really high reactivity, and as you go the other direction, as you get larger.
Brett, can I quickly interrupt? I think we have a sound issue. Not sure if it's your internet connection.
All right, is better? I saw it go out for a second. Am I back on?
Yeah, you sound good now.
I sound good now. Okay. I apologize. I'm not doing anything here. It just must be my internet connection where I'm located. Can you still see my screen?
Yes, I can, but
Okay.
the sound is still a bit iffy.
Okay. I am not sure what to do about that. If we need the recording later, we can.
Probably. Well, go ahead. Just go ahead.
Okay, so hopefully everybody heard most of this, but basically what I'm showing here in this graph is as you get larger in particle size for ZVI, you're lowering your reactivity, but you're increasing your longevity in the aquifer, so it's going to last longer, and you're reducing your cost. You know, larger size ZVI is easier to make, so it costs less money. As you get smaller in diameter, your reactivity goes up, but your longevity decreases and your cost increases. So for aquifer injection, this is my opinion. I would recommend that you think about injecting a ZVI that's something between maybe 1 and 10 microns. And I do know of many projects out there where people will inject ZVIs that are between, say, like 10 and 50. So that's why I'm including that in this shaded block. I think for best distribution in an injection situation, you're going to get the best distribution with a ZVI particle size between 1 and 10 microns, but certainly under certain geological, hydrogeological conditions, you can inject a little bit larger than that and still get good results. So to kind of summarize all this, when might you think about marrying these two technologies, or really what's the differentiation between when you might use one over the other? So to kind of help analyze that and come up with an answer, I'm using this data set that was put together by Travis McGuire of GSI Environmental. So what we're looking at, let's start on the left-hand side. We're looking at basically the performance of bioremediation. So each one of those green dots is a site, and he's plotted them as the site before treatment, what the concentrations of chlorinated solvents were before treatment, and what they were after treatment. And the little hatched lines that are running diagonal, those OOM, that stands for order of magnitude reduction. So you can see he's got 1 order of magnitude, 2 order of magnitude, so on and so forth. Okay. So when I look at this and I kind of break it down a little bit, the first thing that jumped out to me was that you got a group of sites there that I've circled in black with that black circle there. I would say that, you know, for all the reasons that I just mentioned in the slides previously, bioremediation has some site dependency for it to work efficiently. You know, pH has to be right. You have to bring the oil into contact where you need it. There's a concentration limitation. So there is, and I think that these sites, without knowing a lot about them, just looking at this data, I would say that, those represent sites where maybe conditions weren't conducive for bioremediation. Conversely, I'm sorry for my dog barking in the background. Hold on.
That's one of the things of the Corona crisis. We all start to know each other pets.
Yes, very good. Yeah, sorry about that. I had someone coming by the door. All right, I apologize, everybody. All right, so going back to my graph here. So the green circle there in the bottom, you notice that with bioremediation, you have a really high chance of achieving MCL, of achieving those remediation goals that you're after. You can see there's a lot of dots there that got well below MCL. So while the technology is dependent on site character, on site conditions, there's a very high probability of success as well. Now, when we look at zero valent iron, this is the graph on the right-hand side in purple. Same thing. Each one of those dots is a ZVI site. And again, we're looking at how they've changed in terms of orders of magnitude reduction in chlorinated solvent concentrations. And basically, it's kind of the inverse of the bioremediation graph. We don't see a whole lot of sites that say didn't work out, didn't get the reduction they were after. They got really good results when they used the technology. But you see there at the bottom and circled in black, none of those sites where they used ZVI got below MCL. Some of them got to MCL, but they didn't get below it. And so if you have really stringent cleanup standards, well, this graph would say that maybe ZVI isn't the best to get that last few parts per billion cleaned up because it's so contact dependent. And when we kind of compare from a cost standpoint and a concentration standpoint, I've highlighted this section in yellow as I would say this is kind of the sweet spot where you can see ZVI worked really well. So did bioremediation, but you had some bioremediation sites that maybe didn't work out quite as well. And perhaps if you utilized both ZVI and bio at those sites where you have this concentration range, maybe you would have gotten that 1 or 2 orders of magnitude where for the bioremediation sites where maybe they didn't. And then you compare it to cost. Bioremediation is per cubic meter cheaper than ZVI. But if you have really high concentrations, you're probably better off going with the zero valent iron. So to kind of summarize that sweet spot, you would use EOS or emulsified vegetable oil, where you have low to moderate concentrations, something less than 10 milligrams per liter. You're dealing with a single contamination group. So you're just dealing, say, with like PCE or just chlorinated ethanes in general, not ethanes and not, the methanes as well. And you have a neutral pH. Now that can be managed with something like CoBuff, as I mentioned at the very beginning of the presentation, but there are some site situations where maybe adjusting pH is just going to be too complicated or cumbersome to do. So therefore, looking at ZVI, you can use ZVI where you have really high concentrations, greater than 25 milligrams per liter doesn't seem to be an issue for ZVI. If you have mixed contamination plumes, you have TCA and TCE, use ZVI. There is no pH limitation, but contact is key. You could see that from the graph before, that you need to bring the ZVI into direct contact. So really, I think ZVI might be best used where you have small source area hotspots, or when you might use it, say, at that higher concentration range to then jumpstart bioremediation. So there's an option here to use both. They utilize the same redox conditions, meaning that they're both anaerobic technologies. They both utilize reducing conditions as part of their functionality. They both produce hydrogen, so there's some kickback from the ZVI to benefit the biological process. And there's no cross interaction, meaning that there's no side reaction that's going to occur between the zero valent iron and the EOS. So they marry very well together in the right circumstance. So what we would propose for our European partners and customers would be that when you have those site conditions, as I've described, you might consider combining EOS with a microscale zero valent iron. And you can use any microscale zero valent iron that you would like. And Robert at QM Environmental can help you out with selecting a zero valent iron. He can help provide that. And then I would recommend that if you do this, that you combine the ZVI with our product EOS 100. And the reason for that is that EOS 100 is a waterless formulation as it's shipped to you. So when you combine zero valent iron and EOS 100, there is no water in that mixture initially. So therefore, there is no loss of reducing power of the ZVI. So unlike, say, something like a EZVI, or if you buy a water-based substrate and then mix it in the field, there you are losing some reactivity during that initial mixing process. And you wouldn't have that with this EOS 100 and ZVI combo. And so below, I've listed a kind of a recommended formula that you could use in the field. This is by no means set in stone. You could adjust it depending on your site characteristics, but this is probably a good place to start. You would create this material, and then once you have the slurry created, you would then dilute it with water to create a mix of or an injection ready solution. And then the image there on the right hand side is ideally what it would look like when it was all prepared. You'd have nice cloud plume of oil and zero valent iron going into the aquifer. And with that, that concludes my presentation. I do apologize to everyone for the sound issues. I guess I'm just limited by my technology today, but hopefully everybody caught most of the presentation. If anybody has questions,
You're breaking
like
up
to go
again,
back and
Beth.
re-explain anything that perhaps got missed, I'm more than happy to do so. Okay, how about now?
Yeah, now it's better again.
Okay. So sorry. I'm so sorry for my my audio issues. I'm not sure why my internet is failing me today, but it is what it is.
Well, we got a couple of questions. The first one is from Sarah Johansson, and she is referring to the slide where with the graphs where you have the order of magnitudes.
Okay.
And her question is, how can there be an increase at some of the sites on the previous slide, meaning that slide?
Oh, so there was there's some increase in concentrate. So more than likely, I mean, I don't know exactly, but I would float a guess that perhaps when they did the injection, there are a couple things could have happened. Either they had a water table fluctuation, and when they injected the material, water table changed, and then maybe that either desorbed some material, or just by the injection itself. When you do these kind of injections, sometimes you can desorb some contamination. So that might be an explanation. Beyond that, I'm really not sure. I did not dive that deep into the data set to be able to answer that specific question, but I would imagine it has something to do with just the nature of the injection itself and dislodging some contaminant. It could also be that maybe there was some upgrading contamination that got moved into the treatment zone, and it created an increase. That's another possibility.
Good. And Maximo Conti is asking if this technology is applicable for fluorinated hydrocarbons.
Oh, so like PFAS?
Yep.
So. Unfortunately, no. I don't think we have any data to say that this would work on PFAS currently. So right now the answer is no. Maybe that might change in the coming months or years, but right now I don't believe so.
Anyone else got some questions for Brett?
All right.
It seems to stay quiet. So thank you, Brett, for this presentation. Our contact details are below at the screen. If you're in Europe, you can contact me directly at r.wagenveld@qmes.nl. Or you can contact Brett at belkins@eosremediation.com. We are more than happy to answer all your questions. If you have a particular site where you're considering EVO injection, just get in touch with us. We are more than happy to have a look at it and give you an indication of what is needed in respect of amounts of products, maybe a combination of different products. That's what we do on a daily basis, and we are more than happy to do that for you. Thank you, Brett.
Yep, thank you so much.
So unless anybody wants to jump in, then I want to thank you all for visiting and joining this webinar. And I hope you enjoy Remtech. I want to thank the organizers in this way as well for putting this together. I was actually hoping for a very nice visit to Ferrara this year again, but unfortunately we have to do it from our homes and offices behind the laptop and computer. So I hope you enjoy the Remtech, and I'll see you all maybe at the next Remtech exhibition.
Thank you.